Another week, another weekly patch, and from the get-go it seemed like it was going to leave an impact. While there's still the standard of randomized balancing, multiple cards have gotten key changes to improve their viability. Across the board Arcovian balancing, and 2 new cards. It's really 1, but players get 2, so whatever. The boosted rates have also been moved over from Arrow Peaks to Path of Fire as well. The meat of the weekly patch is none other than the Arcovian rebalancing. Fights in Snowville were generally seen as too long for what the area should deliver, and the overtuned enemies only added onto that. For an enemy-by-enemy basis, I'll keep the reasons why they were overtuned short because I already have an entire video on that you should watch. However, I wouldn't say an enemy change was the biggest change in this department, because we have
Arcovian resilience is dead! Ding dong, the wicked counter is nerfed! It's a shame the card didn't get nerfed a year ago! It's a shame the pyromancers didn't hellfire the card!
Arcovian Resilience was a necessary evil due to it checking players putting burn on Arcovians, but the problem was that it did a little too much. It removed all burn effects on the caster, completely removing counterplay. In the weekly, Arcovian Resilience was nerfed to only remove 1 stack of burn and poison, meaning you aren't losing all your burn stacks from an Arco Res. If you go through the effort to put 2 stacks of burn on an Arcovian and they use Arco Res, you still have a burn stack and that's fair. Burn decks are going to be a little bit more reliable now in Snowville due to this change, and that's good. Snowville villagers are no longer a glorified guessing game and have been reverted back to their pre-randomized state, with the exception of still using defrosted buffs instead of buffs. But overall, that's not a huge issue. Snowville Scout, despite being the downgrade to Arcovian Hunters, felt like a side grade if anything, due to its high DPS with U longbow, and its high bulk with the combination of a 15% frost armor and ramparts. In the weekly patch, these 2 aforementioned cards have been removed from its loadout, and its health has been decreased all the way to 225, making it actually feel like a downgraded Arcovian Hunter. Arcovian Mage, despite being a mage, had 35% frost armor, and they had so much in their kit that they can and will use due to their insane bulk. Now their stats and kit act like a mage enemy. Less health, but make up for it with great output. Their health and frost armor have been reduced to 200 and 20% respectively. Now they get 2 turns of Inspire at the start of the battle, however, and their deck has been completely revamped. Something that I never really understood about Snowville was that enemies, save for Snowville villagers, didn't really use that much frostbite, despite the area being the place where you get the cards. With the weekly patch, that changed. Arcovian mages now have a much larger emphasis on Frostbite, Freeze, and Glaciate. With the 2 turns of Inspire on entry, you'll have to navigate through all of this disruption, but it can be managed with skill. Lastly, Arcovian Hunters hit like a truck with Ice Bow, and they had the defense of a brick wall with 40% Frost Armor. While their DPS didn't take a hit because, well, that's their gimmick, their defensive capabilities did. Their health is now 275 and their frost armor is now 30%, allowing players to deal with Arcovian Hunter's stacked DPS loadout better. Second, we're going back to the Drowned Pass again, as Reanimated Pirate got a nerf. While luck gimmicks aren't great, having consistency in its inconsistency is important, and Reanimated Pirate didn't really have that. A 65% lowest cost rate means it could pretty much do anything and you'd never fully be prepared for it. You're prepared to wall its old flintlock, and then it starts stacking disease on you. In this weekly patch, Reanimated Pirate got its health nerfed from 225 to 180. This doesn't address the inconsistency problem, but with how big the health nerf was, I think this balances out Reanimated Pirate's guessing game well. If you're at this point in the video, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like what you're seeing, feel free to leave a like on the video so more people can see it. If you want to know where more content drops, feel free to also subscribe. I have another archetype video in the works that you don't want to miss. Third, there's the randomized balancing changes as always, and this week there's 8 of them, with a good amount of them intended to push cards out of the gutter, so there's a lot to cover.
This is not a banger. This is not a banger, and I know bangers. I know bangers.
Reckless Frenzy had a risk-reward mechanic by cutting your defense by boosting your offense, but that got changed this weekly, as the minus 10% defense modifier was replaced by a minus 5% frail. 5% frail? That's a buff. Well, you forgot to read the fine print. Frail also got hyper buffed this weekly patch, as it now rounds up base damage instead of rounding down, and you take 1 extra base damage on top of that. As Reckless Frenzy was already fine in its previous state without all these extra frail downsides, I don't see why this this change is needed, and I think it should be reverted. Soul Missile got its recoil decreased from 10 to 5. This is a slight buff to a few enemies such as Ganaku and Elite Mage, but probably won't be that noticeable. If you hate mercenaries, you can now get rid of them easier, I guess. Regenerative Pulse got a few changes that will make support decks a little bit easier to sustain themselves. Its minimum range has been removed, meaning the caster can now get part of the healing. However, if the caster is part of the healing, the caster will only get a 6 potency regen for 3 turns, instead of the standard 15 potency for 3 turns. Despite the amount of healing for the caster not being the best, it's better than nothing, so I find it to be a win for support decks. Ice Bolt was in a spot where it was a potential balanced mess. 35 base damage, scaling by 5 for every stack of Freeze and Frostbite on the target, up to 55 base damage. While it is compatible with Icy Sigil, that didn't make enough of an impact. Icy Bolt seemed to be the Gale Blast of Freeze/Frostbite, but it really didn't act like a Gale Blast. In this weekly patch, Ice Bolt got entirely revamped. Its base damage has been increased to 40. Its scaling is actually meaningful now, as its damage increases by 10 for every stack of Freeze and Frostbite on the target. And new to this iteration, its damage also increases by 5 for every Frozen card on the target. Frozen card scaling is notable, as enemies have to use up an entire turn to unglaciate a single card, making glaciate cards not just a disruption mechanic, but one you can now turn into semi-reliable damage. I might actually do an archetype analysis on Frostbite soon, but we'll have to wait and see. Icy Shard was unconditionally worse than its 1-bit Frostbite counterparts, as well as literal starter cards due to its middling output for the cost, as well as it not really having AoE. It gained not only quick play, but unobstructed range too. This has implications for not just its usage in Frostbite decks, but 1-2 as well. Frostbite now gets a low-cost quick play Frostbite at its disposal, which it didn't have before. And 1-2 now has a third quick play attack option, on top of Pawn's Gambit and Magic Dart already existing, giving deck builders a little bit more of a choice there. I'd argue one of Ice Bolt's biggest buffs this weekly patch is actually Icy Shard gaining quick play, since it means you can apply a stack of Frostbite on the same turn that you sling an Ice Bolt. Overall, Frostbite gets some much needed synergy from Ice Bolt and Icy Shard's buffs, and I think these were good changes. Flaming Uppercut got a damage nerf, which, bro, I'm gonna have to rewrite this now. While I'm not gonna completely rule out potential balancing, 25 damage and an AoE of 1 is admittedly elite output, even if you take recoil from it. Its base damage was lowered from 25 to 20 to put it on par with other 1-bit attack cards, like Rusty Knife, Icicle Stab, and the recently buffed Soul Missile. You can still probably use it well and burn in 1-2, but it's no longer the must-bring menace it used to be. I think the nerf was handled well. Sugar Rush's nerf was over the top, going all the way from a 15% defense debuff to a 35% defense debuff, and it was clear from the get-go that it was no longer going to be the big game powerhouse it once was, as everyone then rallied around Arms Race. Add on to the fact that Magician's Secret already dunks on Sugar Rush in most areas of the game, and the card was without a doubt in a horrible spot. Now, its defense debuff has been decreased from 35% to 20%, making its downside less of an issue to play around, but still a fair threat if you misplay. I think Sugar Rush was handled well here. Good job. Lastly, in the balancing change department, we have proof that the Thinkers have a serious vendetta against Guard by buffing or planning to buff almost any summon not named Guard. Seriously, Guard, did you really have to dupe all those Sword and Bucklers? Staff of Azure got buffed in the form of Arcovian Trainees' health being increased from 20 to 25. This change is overall irrelevant, but has a few scenarios where it does make a difference. Arcovian Trainees can now survive a snowball, making them ever so slightly more usable in Snowville. That being said, 25 health is still extremely frail, so you're going to want to place them out of melee range. Finally, the 2 new cards in the player's hands. They weren't noted in the patch notes, as it's a bit of a surprise, but I guess I'll be ruining that surprise for the sake of good card analysis. Lots of discussion can be made on these cards, so let's get started. Wait, why is Wind Powered not in the Arcovian Nerfs or Balancing Changes section? Got nerfed to 3 turns of Freeze and 1 turn of Inspire, which makes most Arcovian enemies have a slightly worse bit economy. Well, the M. Night Shyamalan plot twist is that Wind Powered is finally obtainable after 5 long years. Before you say, well, you can use a Coco to prevent the freeze, the card removes non-permanent freeze immunity, so good luck with that. Gaining 1 bit at the cost of 3 turns of freeze is fair, as it's an equal downside compared to the 20% defense debuff of Sugar Rush, the 5% recoil of Dark Mode, the top deck luck of Everfrost Chunk, and the burnout of Arms Race. If your deck fits where you're positioning yourself on the field before using Wind Powered, then you can partially mitigate the downside. It also has some cool synergy with Blessed Hail and Everfrost Chunk, although the latter is probably going to be removed in the next weekly patch to make the card a little more fair. While While wind-powered isn't compatible with Icy Sigil, it doesn't need to be compatible to be good, so I find this a non-issue. Now what I do find as an issue is wind-powered being void. This was not an oversight. The Thinkers are letting the bit gains settle in before making the decision to unvoid it, which is fair. Wind-powered has a chance to drop from any Arcovian enemy, which makes it very convenient for players to grind for. Wind-powered is a good side grade to the already established bit gains players have, which is healthy for the game and deck building. It may or may not be the worst card of 2025 based on Ignis. The second card which was released to players is none other than Freezer Burn. My good friend Zai has been God's strongest Frostbite hater due to a multitude of issues, but even he likes the design of this new Frostbite card, so that's saying something. For 2 bits, you can apply a 10 damage burn that lasts for 4 turns, and an 8 damage Frostbite that lasts for 4 turns to the target. Freezer Burn ran the Snowville gauntlet of Frostbite's issues and beat all the waves, including the challenge wave consisting of 3 potential balancing feedbackers. First off, Frostbite typically has the issue of dealing inconsistent damage. Not all enemies are melee range, and even on melee range enemies, you might not always have the opportunity to create some distance. Provided you aren't an idiot and use Freezer Burn on a burn immune target, you'll always get some burn damage if things don't go well with Frostbite, which is some much needed consistency for the archetype. Frostbite, save for Deep Chill, also has an issue with not dealing enough damage for the effort. With the exception of Chill, you have to spend bits for Frostbite, and then position yourself well to proc the damage. 72 total damage for 2 bits is worth it. Power creep exists, and you still have to put in the work to activate the Frostbite damage, after all. Freezer Burn deals with both of these issues and will be a solid card in the Frostbite archetype, potentially a good generalist card, but only time will tell. You can get this from Arcovian Mages as a drop. The weekly patch has brought a lot to the table that's good, but also some questionable changes. Frostbite got a lot of adjustments this weekly that will help out the archetype a lot, and of course, Arcovians no longer take an hour to fight. Overall, I'd say this patch has been a net positive, and with what I'm seeing, this narrative is probably going to be maintained for next week with possible changes to Parish and Hired Wizard.